They told you Bangkok was the perfect city break, the Venice of the East, a vibrant metropolis mixing ancient temples with modern malls, street food with rooftop bars, chaos with charm. Millions of tourists visit every year, making it one of the world's most popular cities. But here's what they're not telling you. Behind the Instagram-worthy facade, Bangkok's tourism industry runs on exploitation so systematic and deeply embedded that most visitors never see it. Migrant workers trafficked from neighboring countries and forced into service jobs, sex trafficking operations hiding in plain sight, environmental destruction accelerating as the city literally sinks while tourists party on rooftops, and a two-tier pricing system that treats foreigners as walking ATMs while locals pay a fraction of the cost. This isn't about scams or bad service. This is about structural darkness at the core of how Bangkok tourism actually functions. And if you think you can visit Bangkok without being complicit in systems you'd find morally reprehensible, buckle up, because what I'm about to show you will completely change how you see this city. Let's start with the invisible workforce that makes Bangkok tourism possible, because without understanding who actually serves you in hotels, restaurants and shops, you can't understand the system. Bangkok's tourism and hospitality sector employs an estimated 400,000 to 500,000 workers directly. But here's what tourists don't see. A huge percentage of these workers are undocumented migrants from Myanmar, Cambodia, and Laos, working in conditions that range from exploitative to what international organizations classify as forced labor or human trafficking. The numbers are shocking when you actually look at them. Anti-trafficking organizations estimate that 20 to 30% of workers in Bangkok's tourism sector are undocumented migrants. That's 80,000 to 150,000 people working without legal status, without labor protections, without recourse if they're abused. How did they get there? Many were recruited in their home countries with promises of good jobs in Bangkok. They paid recruiters' fees of 20,000 to 50,000 baht, often borrowed from loan sharks at usurious rates. They crossed borders illegally or on false papers. Upon arrival in Bangkok, their documents were confiscated by employers or labor brokers. They were told they must work to repay recruitment fees, plus interest, before they can leave. They're housed in overcrowded accommodation controlled by employers, sometimes 10 to 15 people in a single room. They work 12 to 14-hour shifts 6 or 7 days a week. They're paid 250 to 350 baht per day, well below legal minimum wage, and often that payment is delayed or partially withheld. They cannot leave because they have no documents, no money, and owe massive debts. They're threatened that if they complain or try to leave, they'll be reported to immigration and deported, losing everything they've invested. This is textbook human trafficking and forced labor by international definitions. And it's everywhere in Bangkok's tourism industry. The hotel housekeeper cleaning your room might be a Burmese woman whose passport was taken by her employer. The restaurant worker serving your pad thai might be a Cambodian man working 14-hour days to repay a debt he'll never escape. The construction worker building the new hotel you're staying in might be a Lao laborer living in a shanty on the construction site. Tourists don't see this because it's deliberately hidden. Workers are told to avoid interaction with guests. They're kept in back-of-house areas. They're moved between jobs frequently to avoid detection. They're terrified to speak up because deportation means losing years of earnings and returning home in debt worse than when they left. One anti-trafficking organization told me they estimate that at least 15 to 20% of workers in Bangkok tourism are in situations meeting the legal definition of forced labor. That's 60,000 to 100,000 people serving tourists while trapped in modern slavery. And the system perpetuates because it benefits everyone except the workers. Employers get cheap, compliant labor that won't complain or demand rights. Labor brokers profit from recruitment fees and kickbacks. Immigration enforcement is lax or corrupt, looking the other way for bribes. Tourists get low prices because labor costs are suppressed through exploitation, and victims have no voice and no power to change anything. Now let's talk about sex trafficking, because this is the darkest aspect of Bangkok tourism that everyone knows exists, but nobody wants to confront directly. Bangkok has an enormous commercial sex industry, serving both local and tourist demand. Estimates suggest 200,000 to 300,000 sex workers operate in Bangkok, though exact numbers are impossible because much of the industry is underground. The vast majority of tourists visiting Bangkok are not seeking commercial sex, but the industry is so visible and so integrated into tourist areas that it's impossible to avoid seeing it. And here's the critical point. A significant portion of people in Bangkok's sex industry are there through coercion, debt bondage, or trafficking, not free choice. Anti-trafficking organizations working in Thailand estimate that 20 to 40% of sex workers in Bangkok are trafficking victims. That's 40,000 to 120,000 people forced or coerced into commercial sex. The trafficking mechanisms are well documented. Girls and women, some as young as 14 or 15, recruited from poor rural areas in Thailand or neighboring countries with promises of restaurant jobs, retail work, or factory positions. They arrive in Bangkok and are told the jobs don't exist, but they can work in bars or massage parlors to repay recruitment fees. Many are sold outright by traffickers to bar owners or brothels for 50,000 to 200,000 baht. They're told they must work until the purchase price plus interest is repaid. They're controlled through debt bondage, passport confiscation, threats of violence, and shame. Many work in establishments that cater specifically to foreign tourists. The go-go bars, massage parlors, and karaoke bars in tourist districts like Sukhumvit, Silom, and near Khao San Road are where trafficking victims are most visible to tourists, though most tourists have no way to distinguish between consensual sex workers and trafficking victims. Here's where tourist complicity becomes unavoidable. Even if you're not a sex tourist, even if you never enter a go-go bar or massage parlor, your tourism dollars support the ecosystem. The bars that hold trafficking victims are on ground floors of hotels where tourists stay. The massage parlors are in malls where tourists shop. The entertainment districts where trafficking occurs are the same areas where tourists eat, drink, and party. Landlords who rent to trafficking operations also rent to legitimate tourist businesses. The corruption that allows trafficking to flourish protects all tourism businesses. The economic system is integrated. You cannot participate in Bangkok tourism without indirectly supporting the infrastructure that enables sex trafficking. And most tourists have no idea. They walk past bars where trafficking victims are displayed in windows. They eat at restaurants owned by the same people who own brothels. They take photos on streets where 15-year-old girls are being sold, and they remain completely oblivious because the system is designed to be invisible to those who don't want to see it. Organizations like ECPAT and Freeland Foundation document cases constantly. Girls trafficked from Myanmar's Shan state to Bangkok bars. Women from northeastern Thailand sold into debt bondage in Patpong. Teenage boys from Cambodia forced into sex work in Silom. The stories are horrific, well documented, and ongoing. Law enforcement is inconsistent and often corrupt. Raids happen occasionally for show, but trafficking operations reopen quickly. The economic incentives are too strong, and the official will to end trafficking is too weak. Now let's talk about environmental destruction, because Bangkok's tourism boom is accelerating ecological catastrophe that will eventually destroy the city. Bangkok is sinking. Not metaphorically, literally sinking into the mud. The city subsides approximately 2 to 3 centimeters per year in some areas due to groundwater extraction and the weight of development. At current rates, large parts of Bangkok could be underwater within 20 to 30 years due to combined subsidence and sea level rise from climate change. But tourism development continues at breakneck pace. New hotels require enormous amounts of concrete and steel, adding weight to already sinking land. They extract groundwater for construction and operations, accelerating subsidence. They generate construction waste that overwhelms the city's limited landfill capacity. They increase traffic, worsening Bangkok's already catastrophic air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. The Chao Phraya River, Bangkok's iconic waterway that tourists photograph and cruise on, is dying. Water quality has deteriorated to dangerous levels. Fecal coliform bacteria exceed safe limits by factors of 10 to 100 in many stretches. Industrial pollutants, heavy metals, and microplastics contaminate the water. Fish populations have collapsed. The river is essentially a moving sewer that happens to have tourist boats operating on it, but tourists don't know because the boats don't publicize water quality reports. Hotels built along the river dump partially treated sewage into it. Restaurants discharge kitchen waste. The floating markets tourists visit are surrounded by trash and pollution. The picturesque river cruise experience exists alongside ecological disaster that tourists never see because it's happening beneath the surface. Air pollution in Bangkok regularly exceeds safe levels. PM 2.5 particulate matter hits dangerous concentrations, especially during dry season. Vehicle emissions from the endless traffic that tourists contribute to create toxic air that causes respiratory disease and premature death. But tourists are shielded from the worst effects because they're in air-conditioned hotels, cars, and malls. The locals and outdoor workers breathe toxic air every day. Waste generation from tourism is overwhelming the city's capacity to handle it. Hotels generate enormous amounts of trash. Restaurants and street food vendors create food waste and plastic. Tourists themselves generate waste at rates far higher than locals. Bangkok's landfills are overfull. Waste management is inadequate. Much trash ends up in waterways or burned, creating additional pollution. The city is drowning in garbage, partially driven by tourism consumption. Climate change impacts are accelerating, worsened by tourism's contribution to emissions. Bangkok experiences more frequent flooding, longer heat waves, worse air stagnation episodes. The city is becoming less livable for residents while remaining profitable for tourism businesses that can air condition and insulate their customers from environmental reality. This is unsustainable. At some point, environmental degradation will make Bangkok uninhabitable or destroy the assets tourists come to see. But nobody in tourism is planning for this because the incentive is to maximize short-term profit while externalizing long-term costs onto residents and future generations. Let's talk about the pricing apartheid that defines Bangkok tourism, because this reveals the fundamental contempt the industry has for tourists. Bangkok operates a systematic two-tier pricing system where foreigners pay multiples of what Thais pay for identical goods and services. This isn't market-driven pricing. This is institutionalized discrimination. Start with official attractions. The Grand Palace charges 500 baht for foreigners, free for Thais. Wat Pho charges 200 baht for foreigners, 50 baht for Thais. The ancient city charges 700 baht for foreigners, 350 baht for Thais. National parks in Bangkok area charge 200 to 400 baht for foreigners, 40 to 100 baht for Thais. This is official government policy explicitly charging foreigners 4 to 10 times more than locals. The justification is that tourists can afford it and revenues support conservation. The reality is, it's a discriminatory tax on foreigners that would be illegal in most countries. But it extends far beyond official attractions. Taxis routinely charge tourists triple or more what they charge locals for identical routes. A ride that costs a Thai person 80 baht costs a tourist 250 to 300 baht because drivers refuse to use meters or claim meters are broken. Markets charge tourists 2 to 3 times local prices. That t-shirt a local buys for 150 baht gets quoted to tourists at 400 to 500 baht. Massage services, restaurants in tourist areas, tour operators all charge foreign prices that are multiples of local prices. Even street food vendors sometimes charge dual prices, though less systematically. Some massage parlors have separate price boards, one in Thai showing 200 baht per hour, one in English showing 500 baht. Tourists paying 500 baht, while the Thai customer next to them pays 200 for identical service. This creates an economic system where tourists are viewed as resources to extract maximum money from rather than guests to serve. It breeds contempt for tourists among service providers who see them as stupid foreigners willing to overpay. It teaches tourists to distrust and become defensive in all transactions. And it's so normalized that even tourists who discover it often shrug and say, "That's just how Thailand works." But it's not how ethical tourism should work. Now here's where it gets really insidious. The two-tier pricing extends to how the justice and legal system treats tourists. Tourists involved in disputes, accidents, or crimes face different treatment than locals. They're more likely to be arrested, more likely to face charges, more likely to pay heavy fines or compensation to avoid court. They have less access to fair legal process. They're viewed as sources of revenue by corrupt officials. Tourist police exist theoretically to protect tourists, but often function to pressure tourists into paying to resolve disputes rather than ensuring fair treatment. One tourist involved in a minor traffic accident reported being pressured by police to pay 30,000 baht compensation immediately or face arrest and lengthy court process. A local involved in identical accident paid maybe 3,000 baht. The system treats tourists as both customers to serve and marks to exploit simultaneously. This cognitive dissonance, where tourists are welcomed for their money but disrespected and discriminated against, creates a fundamentally unhealthy dynamic. So what actually needs to change? Let me be brutally honest that these are problems the tourism industry actively doesn't want to solve because solving them would reduce profits. First, labor trafficking and exploitation. Enforce labor laws stringently. Require all tourism businesses to verify worker legal status and employment conditions. Severe penalties for employing undocumented workers or violating labor rights. Protect workers who report violations from deportation. Create legal pathways for migrant workers to work legally with full rights. None of this is happening because cheap exploited labor keeps costs down and profits up. Second, sex trafficking. Aggressive prosecution of trafficking operations. Protection for victims rather than criminalization. Shut down establishments where trafficking occurs. Severe consequences for landlords and businesses that profit from trafficking infrastructure. Support for exit programs. This would require actually caring more about trafficking victims than tourism revenue, which currently isn't the case. Third, environmental protection. Strict regulations on new development. Requirements for sustainable operations. Carbon taxes on tourism, investment in waste management and pollution control, limits on tourist numbers to sustainable levels. This would reduce growth and profitability, so it won't happen voluntarily. Fourth, end discriminatory pricing. Charge everyone the same for government attractions and services. Enforce price transparency for all tourist-facing businesses. Penalties for dual pricing. Treat tourists with basic respect and fairness. This would reduce revenue extraction, so expect massive resistance. But here's the reality. None of these changes are coming because the incentive structure is completely wrong. Tourism businesses profit from the current exploitative system. Government officials benefit from tourism revenue regardless of how it's generated. Tourists are so numerous that losing some who are bothered by exploitation doesn't matter economically, and most tourists either don't know about these problems or don't care enough to change behavior. So Bangkok will continue operating a tourism industry built on migrant exploitation, trafficking, environmental destruction, and price discrimination. Tourists will continue visiting, posting pretty photos of temples and rooftop bars, completely oblivious to the human misery and environmental catastrophe their tourism dollars support. And officials will keep celebrating tourism numbers while ignoring the dark reality of how those numbers are achieved. The truly awful thing is that Bangkok doesn't have to be like this. The city has enough genuine cultural and culinary assets to support ethical tourism that benefits residents rather than exploiting them. But transforming to that model would require reducing tourism volume, increasing prices, and accepting lower profits. Nobody in power wants that, so the exploitation continues. This isn't about being anti-tourism or saying people shouldn't visit Bangkok. It's about being honest about the systems that make Bangkok tourism possible, and recognizing that when you visit, you're participating in and supporting those systems whether you want to or not. Have you noticed any of these darker aspects of Bangkok? Do you think about the people serving you in hotels and restaurants? Let me know in the comments. And if you believe tourism coverage should include the hard truths, not just the pretty photos, smash that like button and subscribe, because these are the stories that need to be told, even when they're uncomfortable. See you in the next one.